I stood in the back room of the church, in my white dress, bouquet shaking in my hands. My dad was supposed to walk me down the aisle. Instead, he sent one cold text and completely ghosted me on my wedding day. But what happened later at the reception, when the man he had spent years calling a grease monkey stole the spotlight in front of 200 guests, no one saw that coming. If you have ever been let down by family on a day that was supposed to be perfect, drop a comment and also tell me where you're watching from. Drop your city. I read every single one. My name is Emma Thompson, and this is my story. I grew up in a big 2-story house in the hills just north of Austin, Texas. My dad, Richard Thompson, ran a commercial real estate company that made him a lot of money and gave him even more pride. He wore tailored suits even on weekends, drove a shiny black Mercedes, and expected perfection from everyone around him, especially from me and my younger brother Noah. Straight A's were never enough if they weren't the highest in the class. College had to be the best school possible. And the man I chose to marry one day, he had to come from the right family, have the right job, and be able to give me the kind of life my father thought I deserved. My mom, Lisa, was the peacemaker in our house. She was the one who rubbed my back after Dad's long lectures and told me he only wanted the best for me. But even as a teenager, I could see how hard I was working for his approval and how I never quite managed to earn it. No matter what I did, it always felt like I was falling short. When I was 24, I met Jake Harlan at a small coffee shop near the auto restoration shop where he worked. He was a master mechanic who specialized in bringing old classic cars back to life. He had grease under his nails most days, drove a beat-up but spotless 1972 Chevy Chevelle he had rebuilt with his own hands, and had the warmest, loudest laugh I had ever heard. He didn't care about country clubs, fancy titles, or what kind of car someone drove. He cared about showing up, on time, every single time. The first time my dad met Jake was at a family barbecue in our backyard. Dad spent the entire afternoon asking him about his long-term plan and whether he planned on staying in a garage forever. After Jake left, Dad pulled me aside on the patio and said the words that still sting when I think about them. "Emma, that boy is never going to give you the life you deserve. He's beneath you. Mark my words." I looked my dad straight in the eyes and told him he was wrong. I kept seeing Jake anyway. We dated for 3 years. Jake proposed on a regular Tuesday night while I was washing dishes in my small apartment. He got down on one knee right there on the kitchen floor with a simple white gold ring he had saved up for 6 months to buy. There was no big production, no fancy restaurant, no string quartet, just him looking up at me with those steady eyes and asking if I would spend the rest of my life with him. I said yes before he even finished the question. When we told my parents, Dad didn't speak to me for almost a month. He said I was throwing my future away on someone who would never be able to take care of me the way I needed. Mom tried to smooth things over like she always did, but even she seemed worried. Then, about 10 days before the wedding, Dad suddenly changed his tune. He called me out of the blue and said he wanted to walk me down the aisle after all. He even offered to cover the entire open bar at the reception as his wedding gift. I was so relieved I actually cried on the phone. I thought maybe, finally, he was coming around and accepting Jake. I should have known better. The morning of the wedding felt like something out of a dream at first. Mom helped me into my dress, a simple lace A-line that made me feel like I was floating. My best friend fixed my veil while we laughed about old memories. Jake's mom, who had flown in from Oregon, kept hugging me and calling me her daughter already. The little stone church we had chosen looked magical with string lights and flowers everywhere. I kept thinking, this is really happening. This is my day. Until 3:40 p.m. My phone buzzed on the small table in the back room. Dad's name flashed across the screen. The text was short, cold, and final. "I can't do this. I won't watch you make the biggest mistake of your life. Don't expect me there." I read it 3 times. My knees went weak. Mom grabbed the phone from my hand and her face went completely white. She tried calling him again and again, but it went straight to voicemail every time. She called his office, his assistant, even one of his golf buddies. Nothing. He had turned his phone off and disappeared like I was nothing. The church was already full. Over 200 people were sitting out there waiting for me to walk down the aisle. My bridesmaids kept giving me these sad, pitying looks that made me want to scream. I stood in that narrow hallway in my white dress, feeling humiliation crash over me like a wave. My own father had ghosted me on my wedding day because he couldn't stand the man I loved. Jake found me right before I completely fell apart. He was already in his navy suit, looking so handsome, it made my chest hurt. He didn't say anything at first. He just pulled me into his arms and held me tight until my breathing started to slow down. Then he looked me in the eyes and said, "Emma, we don't need him. We never did. If you want to walk down that aisle by yourself, I'll be standing at the end with the biggest smile you've ever seen. If you want to call the whole thing off, I'll still be here tomorrow. But this day is about us, not him." I took a deep breath, wiped my eyes, and made my choice. I chose to walk alone. The music started and I stepped into that long aisle with my head held high, even though my legs felt like they might give out at any second. 200 faces turned toward me. Some looked confused. Some already knew something was wrong. I saw my mom crying quietly in the front row. But then I saw Jake at the end of the aisle, and his whole face lit up like I was the only person in the entire world. That was all I needed. I made it all the way to him. He took my hands like they were the only thing keeping him steady. Our vows were simple and real and full of love. When the pastor said we could kiss, Jake dipped me like we were in an old movie, and the whole church erupted in cheers. For those 20 minutes, everything felt perfect. But the real moment, the one that would change everything, was still coming. The applause was still echoing in my ears when we finally left the reception that night. People kept stopping Jake on the way out, shaking his hand, clapping him on the back, telling him what a stand-up guy he was. I walked beside him in my wedding dress, still in a daze. 200 people had just given a standing ovation to the man my father had spent 3 years calling a mistake. And my dad? He had stayed in the corner the entire time, nursing the same drink, watching everything with this hollow look on his face. We drove home in silence. Jake kept one hand on the wheel and the other resting on my knee. Every few minutes he would squeeze it gently like he was reminding me he was still there. I stared out the window at the dark Texas roads and tried to make sense of what had just happened. My dad had ghosted me, broken every promise he made about the wedding, and then watched from the sidelines while the man he looked down on became the hero of the night. I didn't know whether to feel angry, sad, or strangely relieved. 2 weeks later, my dad showed up at our little rental house like nothing had happened. He had flowers for me and a bottle of expensive scotch for Jake. He tried to make a joke about cold feet running in the family and said he just needed a minute to process everything. I stood in the doorway in my sweatpants, still raw from everything, and could barely look him in the eye. Jake, though, was calm. He shook my dad's hand, invited him inside, and even made coffee. I didn't understand how he could be so polite after everything. Dad started coming around more after that. At first, it was small things, a text here and there asking how work was going or if we needed anything for the house. Then he offered to help us with the down payment on a bigger place. He even floated the idea of bringing Jake into the family business someday, giving him a corner office if he ever wanted to leave that garage behind. He kept saying he had had time to think and realized he had been too hard on us. For a little while, I let myself hope that maybe the wedding had been some kind of wake-up call, but something felt off. Jake noticed it before I did. One night after Dad left, Jake sat me down on the couch and told me he had quietly asked a friend who does private investigations to look into my dad's finances. He said something didn't feel right about how fast Dad had gone from hating him to offering him a job. I was shocked at first, but when Jake showed me the report a few days later, my stomach dropped. Dad's company was in serious trouble. He had taken on too many big commercial projects right before our wedding, and when the market shifted and interest rates went up, he found himself staring at over $215,000 in personal guarantees that the bank was about to call in. That gift he had promised for the open bar at our wedding, he never had the money. He had been hoping I would marry someone wealthy so he could quietly ask for a loan later without losing face. When I chose Jake instead, he panicked and disappeared rather than show up broke in front of 200 people. I felt sick reading it. All those years of him acting like he was better than everyone, and it turned out he was drowning the whole time. Jake didn't confront him. Instead, he did something I still can't believe. He took money from a small trust fund his grandfather had left him years ago and paid off the entire $215,000 anonymously through a lawyer. He made sure there was no way my dad could trace it back to him. He never told me he was doing it. He never told my dad either. When I asked him why, he just said, "Because he's your father, and I didn't want you carrying that weight." 6 months after the wedding, Dad threw a big anniversary party for his company at the same fancy country club he used to take me to when I was little. He invited us, of course. He wanted everything to look normal again. Halfway through the night, the bank president stood up to give a toast. He thanked my dad for their long relationship and then said something that made the entire ballroom go completely silent. And a special thank you to the anonymous family member who stepped in at the 11th hour and kept this company from going under. Your quiet generosity saved more than just one business tonight. Dad looked confused. He had no idea what the man was talking about. Then the bank president turned, looked straight at our table, and raised his glass directly to Jake. The spotlight that had been on my dad for 30 years shifted in one single second. Every head in the room turned toward Jake. People started clapping. Someone shouted for him to say something. Jake stood up slowly, the same calm way he does everything, and simply said, "I didn't do it for the thanks. I did it for Emma, and for the family she still loves, even when they make it hard." I watched my dad's face go pale. He tried to smile, but it looked broken. For the rest of the night, people kept coming up to Jake, shaking his hand, asking about his shop, treating him like he was the most important person in the room. My dad stood off in the corner with a drink in his hand, watching the son-in-law he once despised become the hero of the evening. I never saw my dad look smaller than he did that night. If you have ever been let down by family on a day that was supposed to be perfect, drop a comment and also tell me where you're watching from. Drop your city. I read every single one. The drive home was quiet again. Jake didn't gloat. He didn't say a single word about what had just happened. He just held my hand and drove. I kept thinking about my dad standing in that corner, watching everything he had built almost slip away, only to be saved by the man he had tried so hard to push out of my life. The next few years were complicated. Dad's business survived thanks to what Jake did, but his pride never quite recovered. He tried to act normal around us, but there was always this quiet tension whenever we were all in the same room. He started inviting Jake to golf on weekends. He offered him a corner office again if he ever wanted to leave the garage. Jake always turned him down politely with the same calm smile. He was happy coming home to me every night with grease still under his nails and that warm laugh I fell in love with. We had our first baby 2 years after the wedding, a little girl we named Lily. The day we brought her home from the hospital, Dad showed up at our door with a giant teddy bear, almost as tall as Lily herself. He tried to play the proud grandpa, but when Jake carried her into the nursery and started singing her the same little lullaby he had sung to me on our wedding night, I caught Dad standing in the hallway watching them. There were real tears in his eyes. Not angry ones, just deep, heavy regret. He never said the words, "I'm sorry for ghosting you on your wedding day" out loud. Not once. But he started showing up differently after that. He remembered birthdays without being reminded. He sent Lily little gifts in the mail. He even asked Jake for advice on restoring an old truck he bought as a hobby. It was his awkward, stubborn way of trying to make things right. Then one ordinary Sunday afternoon, everything came rushing back in a way I never expected. We were all at our house for a family barbecue. Lily was running around the backyard chasing bubbles. Jake was at the grill flipping burgers. Dad was sitting on the porch steps watching her with this soft look on his face. Out of nowhere, he turned to me and said, "Emma, I know I can't undo the past, but I want you to know I see now what I couldn't see then. Jake is a better man than I ever was." His voice cracked on the last word. I didn't know how to answer, so I just hugged him. It was the first real hug we had shared in years. Life kept moving after that. Dad started coming over every Sunday for family dinners. He and Jake would disappear into the garage for hours working on that old truck. Classic rock playing in the background. Dad would read Lily bedtime stories in the big armchair in her room, doing all the silly voices I never thought I'd hear from him. He even apologized to my mom for all the years he put the business before everything else. Small steps, but they added up. One evening last summer, we were sitting on the back porch, watching Lily chase fireflies. Dad looked over at Jake and me, holding hands, and said something I'll never forget. "I spent so many years thinking the spotlight was everything. Turns out the quiet guy who just shows up every single day is the one who really matters. I'm proud of you, Emma, and I'm proud to call Jake my son." I squeezed Jake's hand tighter. That was as close to a full apology as I was ever going to get. And somehow, it was enough. Last year, we decided to buy our dream house, the one with the big backyard where Lily could run around and we could finally put down real roots. We had saved every penny. Jake surprised me by putting Dad's name on the closing paperwork as a silent co-signer, even though we didn't actually need it. He said it was his way of closing the circle completely. Dad cried when he found out. Real tears this time. He hugged Jake for a long time, something I had never seen him do before. I still don't know if they will ever be truly close the way some fathers and son-in-laws are, but I do know this. The man my father once despised became the steady, quiet glue that held our whole family together when Dad couldn't. Jake never tried to steal the spotlight. He just kept showing up every single time it mattered. 3 months after we moved into our dream house with the big backyard where Lily could run around chasing butterflies, something happened that brought every old wound rushing back to the surface. It started with a phone call on a regular Tuesday afternoon. I was in the kitchen unpacking the last few boxes when my mom's name lit up on my screen. Her voice sounded thin, like she was trying hard to stay calm. "Emma, honey, your dad collapsed at the office this morning. They took him to the hospital. The doctors are still running tests, but it doesn't look good." The box in my hand slipped and hit the floor. I don't even remember what I said back to her. I just remember Jake walking in from the garage, still in his work clothes, and the second he saw my face, he knew something was wrong. We left Lily with his mom and drove straight to the hospital in Austin. The whole way there, my mind spinning with every old memory I thought I had buried. When we got to the ICU, Dad looked smaller than I had ever seen him. Tubes everywhere, monitors beeping, his face pale and tired. Mom was sitting beside him holding his hand, her eyes red from crying. The doctor told us it had been a serious heart episode, but they caught it in time. He was stable for now, but he needed rest and major lifestyle changes. Dad's eyes met mine across the room. For the first time in years, there was no suit, no big talk, no pretending everything was fine. Just my dad, looking scared and old and sorry. I didn't know what to say. Jake squeezed my shoulder gently and whispered, "I'll wait outside with coffee. Take your time." He always knew when to give me space without making it feel lonely. I sat down next to the bed. Dad's voice came out rough and weak. "Emma, I'm so sorry. For the wedding, for everything." He paused, breathing hard. "I thought I was protecting you. I thought I knew what was best. I was wrong. So damn wrong." Tears started running down my face before I could stop them. I had waited years to hear those words, but now that they were here, they felt heavier than I expected. I told him about how it felt standing in that back room waiting for him, how humiliated I felt walking down the aisle alone, how every time someone asked about our wedding photos, I still had to smile and pretend it didn't sting. He listened without interrupting, something he had never done before. Then he looked past me toward the door where Jake was waiting and said something that surprised me even more. "That boy, Jake, he saved my life twice now. First with the money, quietly, without ever throwing it in my face, and now just by being here with you. I see that. I see him. I was blind before." We talked for a long time that day. Real talk, not the polished version Dad used to give. He told me how scared he had been when the business started crumbling, how his pride wouldn't let him admit he needed help, how ghosting me on my wedding day was the most cowardly thing he had ever done, and he had regretted it every single day since. I didn't forgive him right then. I told him I needed time, but I also told him I was glad he was still here to have this conversation. Jake came back in later with coffee for all of us. Dad looked at him for a long moment and then said, "Son, thank you for everything you've done for my girl, for our family. I don't deserve it, but I'm grateful." Jake just nodded, that calm smile on his face, and said, "We're family now, Richard. That's what we do." The next few weeks were slow but steady. Dad stayed in the hospital for 10 days, then came home with strict orders to rest. Jake and I took turns checking on him and Mom. Lily started asking why Grandpa was always tired now, and I had to find simple ways to explain it to a 2-year-old. One evening, while Dad was still recovering at home, Jake and I were sitting on our back porch after putting Lily to bed. Jake looked over at me and said something I hadn't expected. "Em, I think your dad is finally seeing things clearly, but I also think this heart scare shook him more than he's letting on. Maybe this is the universe giving him one last chance to do things different." I didn't answer right away. I just stared out at the dark backyard and thought about how strange life could be. The man who once thought Jake was beneath me was now the one who needed us the most. If you have ever been let down by family on a day that was supposed to be perfect, drop a comment. And also tell me where you're watching from. Drop your city. I read every single one. A few months later, Dad was well enough to come over for Sunday dinner again. It was the first time he had been to our new house since the heart episode. He moved slower now, and he got tired faster, but he still tried to act like the strong one. Jake grilled steaks while Dad sat in the big armchair in the living room with Lily on his lap, reading her the same book for the 3rd time because she kept asking for it. After dinner, while Lily was napping, Dad asked Jake if he could talk to him alone in the garage. I pretended to clean the kitchen, but I could hear bits and pieces through the open door. Dad's voice was quieter than usual. He told Jake he had been thinking a lot during his recovery. He said he finally understood that being a father wasn't about controlling your kids' lives or deciding who was good enough for them. It was about showing up, even when you were wrong, even when it was hard. Jake didn't say much. He just listened the way he always does. When they came back inside, Dad looked lighter somehow, like he had finally put something heavy down. That night after everyone left, Jake told me what Dad had really said in the garage. He had offered Jake a formal apology for the way he treated him all those years. He said he was sorry for calling him names, for trying to push him out of my life, and for disappearing on our wedding day. He also said he was proud of the man Jake had become and proud to call him family. I cried when Jake told me, not because I needed the apology anymore, but because I could see how much it had cost my dad to finally say those words out loud. Life kept moving after that. Dad started coming over every Sunday, without fail. He and Jake would disappear into the garage for hours, working on that old truck, classic rock playing in the background. Dad would read Lily bedtime stories in the big armchair, doing all the silly voices she loved. He even started apologizing to my mom for all the years he put the business before everything else. Small steps, but they added up in ways I never expected. One evening last summer, we were all sitting on the back porch watching Lily chase fireflies. Dad looked over at Jake and me, holding hands, and said something I'll never forget. I spent so many years thinking the spotlight was the most important thing. Turns out the quiet guy who just shows up every single day is the one who really matters. I'm proud of you, Emma, and I'm proud to call Jake my son. We sat there for a long time after that. We didn't hug, we didn't say everything was fixed, but something between us shifted that night. It wasn't perfect, it probably never would be, but it was honest. And for the first time in years, it felt like we were finally starting from the same place. Jake came back from the garage a little while later and found us both sitting quietly. He didn't ask what we had talked about. He just sat down beside me, took my hand, and gave it a gentle squeeze. That was enough. Over the next year, things kept changing in small, quiet ways. Dad started coming over more often. He and Jake spent hours in the garage together, working on the truck, talking about things I never heard. Sometimes I would stand in the kitchen and listen to them laugh, and it would hit me how strange life could be. The man my father once despised had become the person he trusted most. Lily turned 3 that spring. We had a small birthday party in the backyard with just family. Dad showed up early with the pink tricycle he had spent weeks restoring himself. When Lily saw it, she squealed and ran straight into his arms. I stood on the porch watching them and felt something loosen in my chest that had been tight for a long time. That same week, Dad asked Jake if he could take him out for coffee, just the 2 of them. When they came back, Jake told me Dad had asked him for advice on how to be a better grandfather. He wanted to know how to show up for Lily in ways he had never shown up for me. Jake told him the truth, that it wasn't about grand gestures. It was about being there, consistently, even on the ordinary days. Dad took that to heart. He started coming over every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon to spend time with Lily while I worked. He would read her books, take her for walks around the neighborhood, and let her help him fix little things around the house. She started calling him Grandpa in that sweet, lispy way toddlers do. And every time she said it, I saw something soften in his face. One evening, after Lily had gone to bed, Dad stayed later than usual. He was sitting at the kitchen table with Jake and me when he suddenly said, "I keep thinking about something. All those years I spent chasing deals and trying to build something big, and the only thing that actually matters is sitting right here in this kitchen." He looked at both of us for a long moment. "I wasted so much time being afraid that you would choose the wrong life. Turns out the life you chose was the one that saved mine." I didn't know what to say, so I just reached across the table and squeezed his hand. If you have ever been let down by family on the day that was supposed to be perfect, drop a comment and also tell me where you're watching from. Drop your city. I read every single one. The following summer, we took our first real family vacation together. Just the 5 of us, me, Jake, Lily, Mom, and Dad, to a small cabin in the Texas Hill Country. It wasn't fancy. We cooked simple meals, went on short hikes, and spent evenings sitting around a fire pit. One night, while Lily was sleeping inside, the 4 of us stayed up late talking. Dad told stories about when I was little that I had almost forgotten. Mom laughed more than I had heard her laugh in years. Jake sat beside me with his arm around my shoulders, quiet and steady as always. At one point, Dad looked over at Jake and said, "Thank you for loving my daughter the way she deserves. And thank you for showing me what real strength looks like." Jake just nodded and said, "She makes it easy." That trip didn't fix everything, but it gave us something we had never really had before. Time. Time to be together without old anger getting in the way. Time to make new memories that weren't weighed down by the past. Now, when I look back at that scared girl standing in the back room of the church in her white dress, I don't feel the same sharp pain anymore. I still remember how it felt. I probably always will. But I also see everything that came after. I see Jake standing at the end of that aisle, waiting for me with steady eyes and an even steadier heart. I see him quietly paying for a wedding my father promised and then abandoned. I see him saving my dad's business without ever throwing it in his face. I see him holding our daughter, singing her the same lullaby he sang to me on our wedding night, and slowly teaching my father what it really means to show up. And I see my dad, not the proud, controlling man he used to be, but the quieter version who now spends Tuesday afternoons playing with toy trucks on the living room floor, and who finally learned how to say he was sorry. Blood doesn't automatically make someone family. Showing up does. Every single day. Even when it's hard. Even when you're wrong. Even when no one is watching. Jake taught me that without ever saying a word. He just lived it. And because of him, my dad finally learned it too. I'm grateful every single day that I chose Jake anyway. If you have ever been let down by family on a day that was supposed to be perfect, drop a comment and also tell me where you're watching from. Drop your city. I read every single one.